You know, Christmas is supposed to be a sumptuous feast that everyone eats together. Moderation is fine, but I feel sorry for my son. You may not know this, but when it's Christmas, I think chicken should be more fitting.
Holly, my mother-in-law in a mocking voice, refused to eat the meal I had prepared for her. Immediately thereafter, my husband got up from his seat and took away the meal in front of my mother-in-law.
I'm cutting off my ties with you.
What?
My husband announced shortly, leaving my mother-in-law in a daze. We left my parents-in-law's house. I'm Nicole, 30 years old, and I work in an office at a company. My husband Barry is 31 years old and works for another company. We have known each other since we were children. Barry's father is a corporate executive, and his mother is a housewife, but when he was a child, his mother was often away from home for certain reasons, so we often took care of him at home. Because of this, Barry was well liked by my parents before we started dating, and Barry was also very fond of my parents. We were together all the time, and although there were times when we both went out with different people, we naturally started dating and got married. People around us were very excited about our marriage.
I knew you two would get married.
We were embarrassed, but happy about the fact that we were married. However, my mother-in-law was the only one who was opposed to our marriage. The reason was that I had grown up without a mother, and also because Barry was supposed to be matched with a young lady who knew my mother-in-law. It was my mother-in-law's idea to marry him off, but Barry and my father-in-law ignored it. My mother-in-law directed her anger at me. My mother passed away due to illness when I was in junior high school. But then my mother-in-law looked at my family this way.
Women raised by a single parent are more likely to cheat on their husbands. They will not be able to do the housework and child rearing properly that their mothers should have taught them.
And other such groundless things she had said to me while hiding behind Barry and my father-in-law. My mother-in-law's family had been landowners for a long time, and the young lady that she wanted Barry to marry came from a family with a good background. She said that it would be better for Barry to marry her than me, who grew up in a single-parent household. It was for Barry's own good, she said, and treated me like an obstacle. At first,
why don't you think about marrying Nicole after you meet the young lady I know? There's no need to be so hasty.
She casually expressed her objection, but Barry did not seem to listen to her, so she began to speak more and more forcefully.
Why are you marrying a girl with a single parent? Your mother found you a wonderful lady.
Barry's mother said to him right in front of me. Barry was furious.
I'm not interested in that woman, and I don't care if Nicole has only one parent, or if she's an orphan, or if she had both parents. Don't ever say that crap again.
Since she got told off by him forcefully, she hid away from him, but still continued to repeatedly harass me.
You need to get off your butt and leave Barry. If you love Barry, then get out of his sight so he can be happy.
She kept saying, happiness is not something to be decided by the parents. You say I can't do my chores because I was raised by a single parent, but I was the one who took care of the house while my father was at work, so don't worry. I countered my mother-in-law's words, but the fact that she called and even went as far as to belittle my father and tell me to leave Barry, I decided to discuss this with him. As a result, we had no choice but to stay strong until the wedding. But after that, we would keep our distance from his family, except for weddings and funerals. I especially won't have anything to do with my mother-in-law. We were both settled in our jobs, and we got married when I was 25. For the next 5 years, as Barry had said, except for the occasional visit from my father-in-law, we had very little contact with them. We had a good relationship as a couple, and 1 year before Christmas, I was pregnant with our first child. We were both wondering whether or not we should share it with my in-laws. I received a letter from my mother-in-law apologizing to me.
At the time, I was so sad that Barry was no longer in my care that I took it out on you. I couldn't apologize right away because I didn't know how I would look to you. I am so sorry.
I was quite surprised at what my mother-in-law had written, but if she were really sorry for what she had done, I would tell Barry about it. And then, on Christmas Eve, we would decide to go to my in-laws' house and tell them about the pregnancy.
I'm still not sure if I can trust everything in her letter, but we'll have to tell them about the baby eventually. We'll see how things go this Christmas.
Barry was being cautious about improving his relationship with his parents. Then, on Christmas Eve, when we arrived at my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law greeted us with a smile. She was the first to apologize to me.
I'm so sorry for what happened. I've been thinking about it and regretting it for the past few years. So it was really nice to see you again like this.
I was relieved to hear my mother-in-law's words and stepped into my in-laws' house as I was welcomed. That day, I spent Christmas Eve talking with my in-laws for the first time in a long time. The next day, however, an incident occurred. I was going to tell them about my pregnancy at a dinner party scheduled for Christmas Day, but I was asked by my mother-in-law,
Nicole, it's been a while. Can you help me cook?
She said, so I helped her. Although it's a dinner party, it was just my parents-in-law, my husband, and I enjoying a little luxury food and celebrating Christmas. However, my mother-in-law did not help me with the cooking. She left it to me because she said she's in a great hurry to go shopping and prepare for the dinner party. The menu had not even been decided yet, and it was only after 4 p.m. when she told me about it. I felt uncomfortable about it, but when I went to the supermarket, I found some large tacos which were on display, so I bought those. In fact, Barry and I both have fond childhood memories of eating tacos. When Barry would eat at our house, my mother would make these. It's fun and tasty when we all cook and eat together. She'd say, Barry would always remember this, even as an adult.
Nicole's mother was always very attentive, so I really enjoyed eating at your house because she took care of me when I ate alone. I was able to forget how lonely I was,
he told me, and I responded. It was really fun to eat tacos together, wasn't it? Thinking back on it now, it was also easy because all we had to do was prepare the ingredients. I laughed. And then the dinner party started, and I had just laid out the ingredients for the tacos on the table. My mother-in-law, who was watching me, opened her mouth and said,
Oh, you're serving tacos on Christmas?
Yes, well, you told me about what I was going to cook a little late. I can't cook anything elaborate, and besides, in our family, tacos hold a special meaning for us. Is that bad?
You know, Christmas is supposed to be a big feast for everyone. Moderation is good, but this is not good for Barry. You may not know this, but Christmas is all about chicken.
I couldn't hide my surprise at these words, and I looked at my mother-in-law's face. She was grinning and making fun of me. Then, Barry stood up and took my hand.
Let's go home. I'm cutting off ties with her.
What?
Barry's words were followed by my mother-in-law and my voice. And then, my father-in-law Calvin spoke up.
Holly, weren't you trying to improve your relationship with Nicole?
In response to this question from my father-in-law, my mother-in-law stared at me with a serious look on her face. She began to answer in a voice that sounded as if she was really worried about Barry.
I was going to, but this isn't going to work. You brainwashed Barry, and you're not fit to be our daughter-in-law after all. I have apologized to you, and you're still using Barry to do hurtful things to me.
What? My mother-in-law's comment confused not only me, but also Barry and my father-in-law. According to my mother-in-law, she really wanted to improve her relationship with me. But she decided that it was impossible. And then, it turns out that the lady she tried to match with Barry before also got married, But because of the woman's infidelity, she got divorced and is looking for a new husband. So my mother-in-law decided to bring it up to Barry again. So she sent me a letter of apology to have him come to see her at Christmas. I later heard that while I was out shopping, my mother-in-law had casually told Barry about it. At this point, Barry was already angry with his mother. However, because of the matter of our future child, and since I was out shopping for food, they decided to discuss things after the dinner party was over.
Why are you pushing such a woman to Barry? He already has Nicole. Nicole would never cheat on him, and she's a much nicer girl.
The young lady comes from a good family. She and Barry will get along just fine as divorced couples.
I'm sure the divorce was caused by an affair, right?
You are a man. You can forgive a fling or two, can't you? You forgave me too.
The in-laws began to argue. When my mother-in-law said those last words, it was as if time froze. My mother-in-law had an affair once when Barry and I were still children. Barry was in our house often because my mother-in-law was having an affair and was always away. My in-laws were on the verge of divorce once at this time. My mother-in-law apologized and Barry was still very young. My father-in-law was reluctant to rebuild the relationship. My father-in-law was reluctant to reestablish it. My father-in-law, though quiet, became furious.
You think I forgave you easily for what you did to me back then? Are you saying that you have no problem with your son going through the same thing I went through?
As expected, my mother-in-law was choking on her own foolish words. Holly, you have the nerve to say that I'm prone to cheating on my husband and to leave Barry because of your selfish prejudice of me being raised by a single parent, didn't you? You're from a good family, so why did you have an affair? Don't you think something's wrong with your attitude? Hearing my words, my mother-in-law became even more furious, saying I didn't know what I was talking about. And just when the mood of the place was getting bad, Barry spoke up.
Did you ever think about how that must have felt at that moment? Or if I, who was only your child then, was feeling so lonely? You didn't think about all that, did you? At least, I would never marry a woman who would cheat on me, and I have no intention of leaving Nicole in the first place. I don't want to breathe the same air in this house with a woman like you. We are leaving.
Barry's face was full of anger and contempt. I followed him, unable to speak. My mother-in-law tried to keep Barry back, but my father-in-law would have none of it. From inside the in-law's house, I could hear my mother-in-law frantically apologizing to my father-in-law. When we got home,
I wish I could just tell Dad about the baby. But if he and Mom are going to be together, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want Nicole involved either. I'm sorry you had to go through all this because of my parents.
Barry lowered his head. You didn't do anything wrong, and you were just their child. You are innocent. I couldn't do anything but reply. Later that evening, as we were relaxing at home, Barry received a call from his mother. Barry seems to be arguing with her. I could tell from the way Barry was acting that the discussion between the in-laws was not going to end well for my mother-in-law. I sensed from Barry's behavior that the discussion between his parents had ended badly for his mother.
My parents are getting a divorce. My dad was going to divorce her when I came of age, but he has been holding out until we got married so he wouldn't have to worry about us.
Barry ended the call with a terribly tired look on his face and told me that his parents were divorcing. My mother-in-law called Barry for my father-in-law, who had told her he was getting a divorce. She tried to have Barry to convince his father to reconsider, and also to make amends with Barry's supposed marriage partner, still going on with her selfish way of thinking. Naturally, Barry rejected this, and even told his mother that he would refuse to have any further contact with her. He also said that he was considering legal action depending on the situation. I was appalled at my mother-in-law's brazenness. Barry's condition, rather than mentioning it, I'm quite concerned about his and my father-in-law's mental state, and I just hope that they would be able to separate themselves from my mother-in-law as soon as possible. A few days later, we received a call from my father-in-law. We invited him to our house and had a discussion about the future. According to my father-in-law, his divorce from my mother-in-law was final, and that she was going back to her hometown for the time being. However, it was discovered that the lady and my mother-in-law had been pursuing the marriage proposal with Barry on their own. This led to a lot of criticism from the people around her, so she is expected to soon be kicked out of her house. And when that happens, she will turn to Barry for help. We could help her or we could ignore her. That would be up to our own judgment. Of course, Barry decided to ignore my mother-in-law. He even told me that if my father-in-law showed any kindness to her and continued to have anything to do with my mother-in-law, he would also cut his ties with my father-in-law. When my father-in-law heard this, he laughed out loud and said,
I don't have that kindness in me. I'm going to hire a lawyer so that I don't have to see her face ever again.
He told Barry.
Barry will continue becoming a fine man, and you will be there for him. I've seen that, and now I'm thinking it might be a good idea to go back to the countryside and live a life of solitude. You are thinking of retreating to the country by yourself? That's not a good idea, Grandpa.
Barry smiled at his father, who was a little sad.
I don't see why you two should be in any trouble. You two are getting along just fine, aren't you? Wait, Grandpa?
Barry's father, who seems puzzled by Barry's words, recognized the word Grandpa and looked surprised. I'm actually pregnant. Actually, I was talking to Barry about telling you at Christmas. I'm sorry it took so long to tell you. I bowed my head and laughed. My father-in-law looked as if he was about to burst into tears. He asked Barry if it was really true, and then turned to me and kept saying,
Thank you.
And he was happy to hear that. In the days since Christmas, my father-in-law had been emotionally drained due to my mother-in-law, so I was so glad to be able to report this to him. After talking a bit with Barry, it seems that sharing this news helped him come out of his exhausted state, and he started sanctioning my mother-in-law in a number of ways. First, in order to rebuild things, he meditated on that time when she was cheating on him, demanded restitution for the use of their savings, and asked me to submit and disclose to my mother-in-law's family her bullying and verbal abuse towards me. As for that, I have given my consent, so I provided my father-in-law with a recording of what she said before my marriage and during this Christmas that I had kept in case. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law's family members became even more critical of her. My mother-in-law, who had nowhere else to turn but her parents' home, began to spend her days under cold stares. Only once did my mother-in-law contact Barry.
I don't consider you my mother anymore. I don't even want you in my life anymore. I'm talking to my lawyer, so any communication with me will have to go through him. I will no longer accept direct contact from you.
He hung up the phone and blocked incoming calls from her. And of course, my in-laws divorced. As for the affair that Barry's mother had when he was a child, my father-in-law was not able to file a claim due to the statute of limitations. But he would also explain why whenever he got asked about the reason for the divorce. My mother-in-law told her own family and friends that she was getting divorced due to a daughter-in-law issue, and that she was a victim in this situation. The truth about my mother-in-law's affairs spread quickly, and she completely lost the trust of the people around her. My mother-in-law, who had always had a lot of pride, had a hard time even finding a job. My father-in-law told her that she would have a very difficult life in the future. My father was aware of the situation at the time. He said to my father-in-law, "You've been working so hard all this time." He frequently invited my father-in-law to go fishing, which was a hobby he started after becoming single. When things had finally settled down, he was relieved, but still very tired. He has recently started to regain his energy. He and my father have become so close that they often drink together as well as go fishing. As for me, I have morning sickness, but my baby is growing well. I am having a comfortable pregnancy with the support of Barry, my father-in-law, and my father, who take care of me every day. I had only found out by my mother-in-law's affair when our engagement was finalized, but I remember the sad look on Barry's face at the time. We would never let that happen to our child, so Barry and I always talk about how we want to raise our child with love and care.
Take care of yourself. My mother-in-law loved saying that to me all the time. But now, she wanted to be taken care of because she got hurt in a car accident she caused. I'm her eldest son's wife, so she expected I would take care of her. Even though, until now, she's always harassed me, told me to take care of myself. Even if she needed help. The fact she's forcing it on me because I'm her eldest son's wife. I was reaching the limit of my patience. The anger inside of me exploded, and my true feelings for my mother-in-law came out like a raging torrent. My name is Chloe. I'm in my 30s and work as a pediatric care nurse in my city's general hospital. When I was in my 20s, I worked full-time and did my graveyard shift. But since I gave birth to my son Paul, I decreased my number of shifts a bit. But working as a nurse, you rarely get to end work exactly at 5 p.m. If an emergency case came in, I would have to work overtime. Even if I had a night shift, I probably wouldn't be able to leave work exactly on time the next morning. But I was proud of my job and put my all into it. I began living with my in-laws after I married my husband, Francis. We built our new home on the same spot that my in-laws' house used to be, so they naturally began living with us. I wasn't against this at first, but my mother-in-law gradually began revealing her true nature, and it became very uncomfortable for me to be at home. My father-in-law was a man of a few words, so I never knew what he was thinking, and we never argued. But my talkative mother-in-law would always insult me the moment she sees me. Why aren't you doing anything when you are the wife? Do you really think it's okay to keep forcing your husband and in-laws to do things for you? As she said that, she began to pick up toys scattered around my son's room. I knew that my son would make a mess again as soon as he saw his room was clean. So I always waited until he was asleep to start cleaning. Even though my mother-in-law also knew that very well, she would complain that I do nothing and pick up Paul's toys while groaning. I never asked her to do that. And I would clean when Paul went to sleep anyway. If I was stuck at work late and couldn't clean, Francis would do it for me, trying to make me seem like a bad person just because of this. Of course, I was annoyed with my mother-in-law. It was my husband who proposed we live together like this, though I was busy in the hospital working as a nurse. Francis worked remotely and was nearly always at home. He wasn't very busy most of the time, so he would do a lot of housework himself. Most people would consider him a wonderful husband because he did that. But of course, my mother-in-law didn't feel that way. A woman is supposed to do her housework. Especially since you married into our family. You should do everything. And yet, you use my precious son this way. My mother-in-law didn't realize I was ignoring her, or maybe she just didn't care. Not that my mother-in-law ever did anything around the house. She would laze around her room all day and leave the dishes she used unwashed, so that I would have to wash them when I get home from work. And if I use the dishwasher, the plates will chip. Wash them by hand. She would complain about even the smallest of things. I tried to tell her, please wash her dishes herself in that case. Since we are letting you use this land, you should do at least this for us. Your role here is to take care of our family. Take care of this yourself. My mother-in-law said things that didn't make sense again, so I let our conversation come to an end. Annoyed, I decided I will avoid talking to my mother-in-law. A few days passed. Francis was the one who usually took Paul to daycare, but since I had the day off work, I decided I would drop off Paul at daycare today. I don't know about other places, but at the daycare we go to, even if a parent has a day off on a weekdays, they are more than welcome to leave their kids at the daycare. All the parents knew and took advantage of that. But as I was heading out of the house with Paul, "Oh, you have the day off, but you are taking Paul to daycare? If you have a day off, you should also give Paul a day off." She began whining to me. Paul was 3 years old and just getting to a stage where he began throwing tantrums. If he was at home, he wanted to go out, and if he was out, he wanted you to carry him piggyback. If he was hungry, he would get very restless. Francis was busy with work, and Paul was at an age that will be difficult for me to take him out alone. The daycare says it's fine, I replied quickly. My mother-in-law didn't really like kids. She would get tired of taking care of Paul within 10 minutes, which is why we took Paul to daycare even though we lived with his grandparents. Anyway, I wanted to rest today, and Paul liked going to his daycare. He had even been saying since the morning that he wants to go, since they were holding some special event today. But no matter how I explained this to my mother-in-law, she wouldn't accept it. When I suggested she take care of Paul then, she wouldn't agree to that either. If we didn't leave soon, we wouldn't make it to the daycare until after 9 a.m. I didn't know what to do.
Mom, Chloe works every day without resting. She also does housework and takes care of Paul. The daycare says it's fine, and Paul wants to go too. So, let him go.
My husband came to the rescue. Suddenly, my mother-in-law's anger turned into a smile.
You alright?
Go out and enjoy. She sent us off so cheerfully, it almost felt gross. Francis was her only son, so she really loved him. She would easily accept just about anything he told her. So he held a lot of power around the house. I thanked him, and Francis gave me a thumbs up and a carefree smile. After all that hassle, I finally sent Paul off to daycare. When I got home, Francis' car was gone. I usually drove a van I had bought myself, and my husband drove an old compact car. Seeing that his car was gone, I had assumed that Francis has gone out somewhere. But when I entered the house, he was sitting in the living room as usual. When I told him his car was gone, he rushed outside in a panic and was shocked to see the driveway empty. His father was in his room watching TV. So since the car keys were gone, his mother must have gone somewhere. Francis covered his face with his hands, and he said his mother was a horrible driver. Just 1 month ago, she had gotten into a fender bender. My mother-in-law said it wasn't her fault, but when we checked the other car's dashcam, we saw that she had been tailgating them in the entire time. She was undeniably a bad driver. Francis and I had to do all we could to apologize to the other driver to avoid getting into even bigger trouble. We hid our car keys from her, but she somehow found them and went out driving again.
My mom should still have insurance, as long as she doesn't get into an accident.
Francis was mumbling this to himself. but our fears became reality. A few hours after she had left, I suddenly got a call from the hospital. It was a call from a colleague and friend of mine who worked in the emergency room. She told us that my mother-in-law had sustained huge injuries from a car accident and was currently being transferred to the hospital. I told Francis and his father, and we rushed to the hospital in a panic. My mother-in-law was in the operating hall. We were outside waiting for her, nervously, when the police arrived. When we heard what had happened, we all went pale. According to the police, my mother-in-law was irritated that the car in front of her was driving a speed limit, so she was tailgating them. When the driver in front of her stopped at the red light, my mother-in-law slammed into them. Luckily, the driver in front of her was able to skillfully swerve their car so that they avoided any big trouble. But my mother-in-law ended up driving straight into a telephone pole. It was lucky that no pedestrians were involved. But my mother-in-law had to be brought to the hospital because her lower body had been crushed and she had lost consciousness. As we continued to speak to the police officer, my father-in-law announced that the surgery had finished. Fortunately, her accident hadn't been life-threatening, but her lower body was very hurt and she had to have a leg amputated. Hearing that she was relatively okay, we all relaxed. After some time passed, we were told that my mother-in-law had woken up from her anesthesia, and my father-in-law rushed to her hospital room. Francis and I were speaking to the police officer about the person whose car my mother-in-law had hit, so we didn't make it to the hospital room until a bit later. When my mother-in-law saw me, "Look at this! This is the worst! I can't walk on my own anymore. You're my eldest son's wife, and you are useless around the house. So from now on, you better take responsibility and take care of me." She screamed at me. My father-in-law gave his wife a stern look, and Francis opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. I had reached my limit. Until now, I'd been able to deal with her selfishness and accept the mean things she said to me. And in order to save her the trouble this time, I even spoke to the police for her, even though she only thought about herself and just caused everyone around her trouble. She was now trying to force me to take care of her. I lost my patience. Shut up. Take care of yourself. That's what you always tell me, right? The anger inside of me exploded, and my true feelings for my mother-in-law came out like a raging torrent. I forgot that my husband and father-in-law were next to me, and I let out all my frustration at my mother-in-law. Francis's father is the one who letting us use the land, and he's the one who gives you all the money you use, right? You've been a housewife all your life, so you don't understand what it means to work full-time like I do. I couldn't stop myself from letting everything out. I nobody would just timidly say that full-time and part-time housewives should all help each other out as much as possible. But this time, I couldn't leave it at that. You are supposed to be a housewife, so why don't you actually do something around the house for once? I even bought convenient appliances to help save us time and effort. You can't just hold on to your old-fashioned ways of thinking forever. If you hate that I use appliances so much, do the cleaning and housework yourself. I want to take care of you. When I finally finished talking, Francis looked at me with a worried face. Maybe I went too far. Though I hated her, she was my husband's mother and my father-in-law's wife. Since I married into the family, maybe I should apologize? Chloe, you've been holding this in all this time, huh? I didn't notice at all. I'm sorry for being a failure as a husband. Francis said softly and hugged me. My father-in-law also sided with me. Chloe, you put all your effort into her family. by keeping the house in order and raising Paul. I've always felt bad. I should have said something before. I'm sorry. He looked very apologetic. My mother-in-law was stunned to see that both her son and her husband were on my side. Wait, what are you saying? Why are you making it sound like I'm the bad person here? She began to make a fuss. But my father-in-law looked at her calmly. This all happened because you stole the car keys they had hid from you, driving without permission, and getting into this accident. It's all your fault. You need to accept that you were to blame here. Being told off by her husband, my mother-in-law slouched over. No matter what she tries to say, she's just getting what she deserves. She should be grateful she lost her legs and not her life. Ultimately, no one came to visit her again, and she was lonely in the hospital until she was finally discharged. The day she was finally discharged from the hospital, she seemed very happy. After my mother-in-law had fully regained her consciousness, she was moved from the ICU into a regular ward. I heard from my friends who worked in that ward that she would attack the nurses there every day. I apologized to them countless times. At one point, I stopped hearing about her, and I wondered what had happened. Did you hear? A young patient in the same room as your mother-in-law told her off. The patient told your mother-in-law that she's too old to be treating the nurses like that. One of my colleagues told me in a bemused voice. Since that colleague knew about my mother-in-law had bullied me, she felt very satisfied after that other patient told my mother-in-law off. Now that my mother-in-law had quieted down, I could breathe a sigh of relief. My mother-in-law said the hospital was stifling, so she must have thought that being discharged meant that she could be free again. But our punishment had just begun. Can you take a look at this? I handed my mother-in-law a pamphlet for an elderly care home. She immediately understood that we were planning to send her there. Why do I have to go there? Taking care of me is your job, she repeated again. Doesn't she understand what we all think about her by now? There is not one person in this house who wants to take care of you. If you can do everything on your own, you can stay here. But you realize that no one will help you, right? My mother-in-law's face got bright red, and she was seething in anger. Stop saying such stupid things. There's no way you can neglect me like this. She continued to bark at us like this, but no one wanted to take care of her. She wouldn't listen to any of my explanations. So Francis eventually had to force her to understand the harsh truth. Mom, you realize that getting discharged from the hospital didn't mean that everything was over, right? We haven't been able to sort out anything related to your accident. Can you take responsibility for totaling my car? By telling you to do everything yourself, we mean taking responsibility for your car accident as well. Being told this, my mother-in-law was silent. The driver of the other car recovered from all of their injuries within a month. The passenger had just suffered from some minor scratches and bruises. My husband's car had been completely wrecked. Our insurance covered the damage of the other person's car, but not to my husband's. Since this wasn't the first time she had caused an accident, it was clear that my mother-in-law would also be punished by the law. Her driver's license would definitely get taken away, and she would probably have to pay around $4,000 in fines. And considering the compensation she would have to pay the other driver, she would have a lot of money to pay. If you have enough money to pay all your fines, buy Francis a new car and hire yourself a helper. Go ahead and do it. My mother-in-law had nothing more to say, so she finally gave up. She probably didn't think this would become such a big deal. We signed her up for the care home. We used her life insurance to cover the fines. She had to pay the care home cost. Since she had lost one of her legs, she was able to receive disability from the government, which helped a lot. Her driver's license was taken away, and since she was living in the care home, she would likely never have access to a car again. But it seemed her life in the care home isn't all that great. Since she has a bad personality, she hadn't been able to make any friends. She continuously insults all the other residents and attacks the caretakers, so everyone hates her. We rarely ever visit her though, so we don't bother ourselves with that. She has no one by her side and lives a lonely life. A huge took place in her home since my mother-in-law moved out. First, with my father-in-law. Fishing is dirty and just a waste of money. My mother-in-law was against my father-in-law's hobby. But now that she was gone, he could finally enjoy fishing again. He would leave the house early or sometimes disappear late at night. He's been catching all kinds of fish recently and letting us taste all of them. Some of his friends are professional fishermen, so he even gets enjoy riding on their fishing boats with them. He used to just stay in his room all day, but now he's energetic and living his life the way he wants to. With the stress of my mother-in-law gone, I got pregnant with Francis and I's second child within 3 months. Surprised and happy at the same time, our family is now eagerly awaiting the birth of our new baby.